Good evening, friends. Let me welcome you to this quiet corner of history, where tonight we'll drift into something truly specialer, journey back through time to the coldest, darkest nights of the medieval world, when survival itself was an art form passed down through generations. If you're listening to this, I want you to do something for me. Dim your lights just a little. Pull that blanket up around your shoulders. Maybe adjust your pillow so you're perfectly comfortable. Let the weight of the day begin to lift tonight. We're going to explore something remarkable together. How ordinary people, peasants living in stone cottages and wooden huts, made it through winters that would challenge even our modern sensibilities. We'll discover their secrets, their warmth, their surprisingly clever solutions to problems we rarely think about anymore. And we'll do it slowly, gently, with plenty of time to let each detail wash over you like a warm wave. Before we begin, if this calm journey helps you unwind, if my voice becomes a companion for your drift into sleep, tap that like button and subscribe, but only if it feels right. No pressure. Just know that it helps me continue making these peaceful voyages through history for you. Now, let's go back, way back, to a time when the cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a force to be reckoned with, respected, and somehow beautifully survived. Let me tell you about a particular evening in November of 1347, in a small village somewhere in what we'd now call rural England. I want you to imagine you're there with me, standing outside a cottage, just as the sun is setting, that deep orange glow that seems to make everything softer, gentler, like the world itself is preparing for sleep. The air has that crisp quality to it. You know, the one where each breath feels clean, almost sharp in your lungs, but not unpleasant, just present, real. You can see your breath, just faintly, curling up into the dimming sky like tiny ghosts of warmth escaping into the cold. The cottage before us is small, maybe 20 feet across, with walls of stone and mud daub, and a thatched roof that looks thick, enough to keep out anything the sky might throw at it. Let's step inside together. The door really just wooden planks, held together with iron bands, and leather hinges creaks as we push it open, and immediately you're hit with that wall of warmth. It's not the kind of heat that makes you uncomfortable, not like turning up a thermostat too high in a modern house. No, this is different. This is the warmth of a fire that's been burning for hours, maybe days, carefully tended and never allowed to fully die out. Because you see, in 1347, starting a fire from scratch was real work, involving flint, steel, tinder, and patience. So once you had a fire going, you kept it going. The family living here, let's call them the Millers, because someone in every medieval village seemed to be connected to the mill somehow. They've spent the entire autumn preparing for this moment, for winter, the real winter, the kind that could last from November clear through to March, with temperatures that would regularly drop below freezing and stay there for weeks. Let me paint you a picture of their cottage, because every detail matters when you're talking about survival. The floor isn't wood. Most peasants couldn't afford wooden floors. Instead, it's packed earth, hard from years of being walked on, swept clean every day with a bundle of twigs that functions as a broom. But here's where it gets clever. They've covered this earth floor with rushes. Not just any rushes, but fresh ones that were cut from the riverbank last week, dried in the autumn sun, and then spread thick across the floor like the medieval version of carpet. These rushes do something wonderful. They provide a layer of insulation between the cold ground and human feet. They trap little pockets of air underneath, and air, as you might remember from some long ago science class, is actually an excellent insulator when it's not moving. Plus, the rushes have this gentle, sweet smell, like dried grass and river water and summer afternoons, all mixed together. When you walk across them, they make this soft, rustling sound, like whispers in the dark. Now, look up. The ceiling is low, so low that a tall person would have to duck near the edges. This isn't because medieval people were all short, that's actually a myth, but because low ceilings mean less space to heat. Heat rises, yes, but in a low-ceilinged room, it doesn't have far to go before it's right there, surrounding you, keeping you warm. The ceiling itself is just the underside of that thatched roof. Exposed rafters of dark wood that are probably home to friendly spiders who earn their keep by eating flies and mosquitoes in the center of the single room. Yes, it's all one room for everything: cooking, eating, working, sleeping, living. There's a fire pit. Not a fireplace with a chimney like we'd think of today, but a shallow depression in the earth floor, ringed with stones to contain the fire. The smoke drifts upward, darkening the thatch above, and eventually finds its way out through gaps in the roof and through a small hole that serves as a very primitive chimney. Your eyes might water a little from the smoke, but you'd be amazed how quickly you'd adjust. Medieval people spent their whole lives in smoky rooms, and their eyes adapted in ways ours never have to. The fire itself is burning wood, not just any wood, but carefully selected pieces that have been drying in a covered stack since last winter. Dry wood burns hotter and cleaner with less smoke. There are oak logs forming the base, burning slowly, providing steady heat. On top, smaller pieces of ash and birch, which catch easily and burn bright. And gathered around this fire, like worshippers at an altar, which, in a way, they are, sits the family. John Miller, the father, a man whose age is impossible to guess, because hard work and weather age people differently than our modern lives. Dewey's weaving a basket from willow strips that he soaked in the river this morning. His hands move with the automatic precision of someone who's done this 10,000 times, requiring no thought, leaving his mind free to wander, to plan, to rest. His wife, Alice, is spinning wool on a drop spindle, creating thread that will eventually become cloth, that will eventually become clothing or blankets. The rhythm of her hands, drop, catch, wind is hypnotic, meditative, the kind of repetitive motion that probably feels as restful as it is productive. Their 3 children are closer to the fire, absorbing its warmth like little sponges. The oldest, maybe 10 years old, is mending a tear in a leather shoe with an awl and strips of deer sinew. The middle child is supposed to be carding wool using 2 wooden paddles covered in tiny hooks to straighten and align wool fibers, but is mostly just staring into the fire, watching the flames dance. And the youngest, no more than 5, is already asleep, curled up on a pile of sheepskin, thumb in mouth, breathing the slow, peaceful breaths of a child who feels completely safe. Let me tell you about those sheepskins, because they're important. Sheep, in medieval England, were everywhere. They were walking wool factories, meat storage on the hoof, and their skins, once tanned, became one of the most versatile materials imaginable. The family has been collecting sheepskins for years, some from their own small flock, others traded for or purchased at market. These skins, with the wool still attached, become blankets, become bedding, become wrappings for the coldest nights. When it's time for sleep, and in winter, that time comes early, because firelight costs fuel and candles are expensive luxuries. The family will essentially create a nest on one side of the room. They've built a low platform, just a few inches off the ground, from wooden planks. This platform keeps them up off the cold floor, and onto it they'll pile all those sheepskins, creating a communal bed. Then more skins on top, creating layers of wool and trapped air that function surprisingly like a modern sleeping bag. But here's what I find most beautiful about this scene. They sleep together. Not because they have to, though the cottage is small, but because bodies generate heat. 3 children between 2 parents, everyone sharing warmth, everyone contributing to the collective temperature. It's intimacy born of necessity, yes, but also of comfort, of security, of family. The youngest might start the night between the parents, but by morning, all 3 children will have somehow migrated into a tangle of arms and legs in the middle, like puppies in a pile, on the coldest night sand, when water left in a bucket would freeze solid. When your breath felt like it might freeze before it left your mouth, they'd bring the animals inside. Yes, the animals. The family cow, if they were lucky enough to own one, a few chickens, maybe a pig. These animals would be sectioned off at one end of the cottage, creating what we'd now call a byre. And while I know what you're thinking, the smell, the noise, the mess, you have to understand. A cow is an enormous heat generator. A single cow can raise the temperature of an enclosed space by several degrees just by existing, just by breathing, just by being a large, warm-blooded mammal. And this is where medieval peasants showed their genius, their deep understanding of the world around them. They didn't fight against nature. They didn't try to conquer winter with brute force. Instead, they worked with what they had, using every tool, every resource, every clever trick that centuries of cold nights had taught their ancestors. The walls of the cottage have been prepared to. On the inside, they've hung every available piece of fabric-holed clothes, worn-out blankets, anything that could create another layer of insulation between the living space and the cold stone. Some families would even stuff the space between stones with moss or dried grass, thinking of their walls the way we might think of insulation in our modern homes. Every crack, every gap, every place where cold air might sneak in has been chinked with clay or stuffed with straw near the fire. You'd find the family's most precious possessions related to warmth. There's a stack of peat bricks, dried chunks of compressed plant matter dug from boggy areas and left to dry all summer. Peat burns slower than wood and gives off tremendous heat, though the smoke has a distinctive earthy smell that's not unpleasant once you get used to it. There are also sacks of dried dung, yes, animal dung, carefully collected, dried, and stored because it burns surprisingly well and doesn't smell nearly as bad as you'd think once it's been properly dried and is burning. Fuel was currency in the winter. Fuel was survival. Running out of things to burn was one of the most dangerous scenarios a family could face. So all through summer and autumn, Firewood was gathered, stacked, covered, and guarded. Children would be sent into the forest with carts to collect fallen branches. Dung from the animals would be shaped into bricks and dried in the sun. Peat would be cut from the bog. It was endless, tiring work, but it was the work that would keep them alive when the snow came as the evening wears on in our cottage. You can see the family beginning their bedtime rituals. It's probably only 7 or 8 o'clock by our modern reckoning, but without electric lights or much in the way of candles, there's no reason to stay awake once the sun is down. Alice checks the fire, adding one more log, banking the coals so they'll stay hot through the night without burning too much fuel. This is an art keeping, a fire alive but not active, hot but not flaming, ready to be coaxed back to life in the morning with just some kindling and gentle blowing. John makes a final check of the door, making sure the leather hinges are secure, that the wooden bar is in place, not because they fear thieves particularly, but because a door that blows open in the night could let in a wind that would kill the fire and drop the temperature to dangerous levels in minutes. The children need no encouragement to move to the sleeping platform. They've been growing drowsy by the fire, and now they burrow into the sheepskins like small animals finding their den. Alice and John will join them soon. But first, there's a moment hand. I want you to really picture this, where they sit together by the fire, perhaps sharing a cup of weak ale because water from the well could be dangerous. But ale that had been boiled in the brewing process was safe, perhaps saying a quiet prayer, perhaps just sitting in comfortable silence after a long day of work. This is survival, yes, but it's also life. It's also contentment. They're not suffering, not really. They're doing what humans have always done, adapting, making do, finding warmth and comfort and even joy in the midst of challenging circumstances. The fire casts dancing shadows on the walls, making the whole cottage feel alive, animated, protected. Outside, the temperature is dropping. Frost is forming. The world is going still and silent and cold. But inside, there's warmth. There's family. There's the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of sleeping children and the absolute certainty that tomorrow will come and they'll be here to see it. And as the fire fades to embers, as Alice and John finally settle into the communal bed, as the last sounds of the day give way to the profound quiet of a winter night, the cottage becomes a small island of warmth in a cold world, the thatch above, the stones around, the earth below. The bodies together, all working in concert, all part of a system developed over centuries, all focused on one simple, beautiful goal, making it through to morning now. Let your mind rest with them, there in that cottage. Feel the warmth of the fire, the softness of the wool, the comfort of knowing you're safe and warm when the world outside is cold and dark. Drift with me toward the next part of our journey, where we'll explore more of these beautiful, clever solutions to winter's challenges. Let me take you deeper now into the science and art of medieval warmth. It's easy to think of fire as simply you light it, it burns, it gives off heat. But in the medieval world, fire was a living thing that needed to be understood, respected, and carefully managed. And the place where that fire lived, the hearth, was sacred in ways we've lost in our modern world of thermostats and central heating. Picture yourself in a slightly larger cottage now, maybe belonging to a more prosperous peasant or a small landholder. The year is 1289, and we're somewhere in northern France, where the winters come hard and fast, and don't let go until spring decides it's ready. This cottage has something special, an actual fireplace built into one wall, with a proper chimney made of stone rising up through the roof. This was luxury, friends. This was progress. Most peasants still had central fire pits, with smoke finding its own way out. But for those who could afford it, or who had access to a good mason, a wall fireplace changed everything. The stone surround of this fireplace is massive, large enough that you could almost step inside it. And in fact, on the coldest nights, children might sit right inside the fireplace, opening backs to the flames, soaking up heat like lizards on a sun-warmed rock. The stones themselves have been chosen carefully. Not just any rock will do for a fireplace. You need stone that can withstand repeated heating and cooling without cracking and exploding. Some types of stone will actually explode when heated rapidly, sending sharp fragments flying through the room. So builders used limestone, sandstone, or granite. Stones they knew from generations of experience could handle the stress. And here's something wonderful. These stones absorb heat. During the evening, when the fire is burning strong, the stones around the fireplace become hot to the touch, too hot. Actually, you couldn't hold your hand against them. But that heat doesn't disappear when the fire dies down. No, those stones release that stored heat slowly throughout the night, radiating warmth into the room for hours after the last log has burned to ash. It's thermal mass. The same principle used in modern passive solar homes was discovered and perfected by medieval builders who never heard the term but understood the reality intimately. Let me introduce you to the family who lives here. The Beaumont Spear, his wife Marguerite, and their daughter Isabel, who, at 15, is old enough to be thinking about marriage and managing her own household soon. Pierre is a wheelwright, a skilled craftsman who makes and repairs wheels for carts and wagons, which means the family has a bit more wealth than average. But more wealth doesn't mean immunity from cold. It just means more options for dealing with it. Watch Marguerite as she prepares the evening meal. It's November again, seems like November is the month when you really start to understand what winter is going to mean. She's cooking a pottage, which is the medieval equivalent of stone super thick stew that might contain beans, peas, onions, turnips, barley, and, if they're lucky, some salted pork or bacon for flavor. The iron pot hangs from a hook on a metal arm that swings out from the fireplace, allowing Marguerite to move the pot over different parts of the fire for different cooking temperatures. But here's what I want you to notice. The cooking fire does double duty. It's not just preparing food, it's heating the house, providing light, creating the social center of the home. Everything happens around the fire. Pierre brings his work inside when the light fades, scraping and shaping wood by firelight, letting the heat warm his hands, which ache from a day of hard work in the cold. Isabel sits nearby, practicing her needle, creating elaborate embroidery on a linen altar cloth. She's making for the parish church, the heat from cooking, the steam rising from that pot of pottage, the warmth radiating from the fire beneath. It fills the room with a humid warmth that's much more comfortable than dry heat. Dry heat, especially dry heat from burning wood, can make your skin crack, your lips chap, your throat feel raw. But this moist heat from cooking, Especially cooking something wet like soup or stew keeps moisture in the air, making everything feel warmer and more comfortable. Now, let's talk about something that might surprise you: smoke. We think of smoke as a problem, something to be avoided, a sign of poor ventilation or a fire that's not burning properly. And yes, too much smoke is absolutely a problem. But medieval people understood that some smoke actually had benefits, that smoke rising up from the fire, finding its way through the thatch, or up the chimney. It was treating the roof, acting as a natural preservative and insect repellent. Thatch that was regularly smoked from below could last twice as long as thatch that stayed clean. The smoke killed insects, prevented rot, and even provided some waterproofing, as resins and oils from the burning wood condensed on the straw and inside the house. That slight smokiness in the air, it helped preserve food that was hanging from the rafter sides of bacon, strings of onions, bunches of dried herbs. The smoke kept flies and other pests away, added flavor to the meat, and created that environment that was hostile to the bacteria and molds that could spoil food. It was food preservation and pest control in one, all just from allowing your fire to be a little bit smoky. But let's move to the sleeping arrangements in this household, because they're different from our first cottage and show another approach to staying warm. Instead of one communal sleeping platform, this family has what we might call beds, wooden frames raised off the ground, each with a wooden base supporting a mattress stuffed with straw or wool. Isabel has her own bed, separated from her parents by a wooden screen that provides some privacy. These beds are four-poster affairs, though not the grand canopied beds of nobility. Instead, the posts support a frame from which heavy wool or linen curtains hang. At night, these curtains can be drawn closed, creating a small enclosed space around the sleeper, essentially a tent within the house. This is brilliant for heat retention. Your body heat warms this small enclosed space, and the curtains trap that warmth around you. The curtains also block drafts, because despite all efforts, medieval buildings were drafty affairs, with windows covered only by wooden shutters and gaps in construction that were impossible to completely seal. Inside these bed curtains, the medieval sleeper would pile on layers. First, the undersheet, usually linen if the family could afford it, or sometimes just the bare straw mattress covered with a blanket. Then the sleeper themselves, probably in a linen shift or nightgown. Yes, nightgowns existed and were common. On top, wool blankets, not just one or two, but 3, 4, 5 in the coldest weather. And finally, for the wealthiest, a fur coverlet, though for most people, this would be another sheepskin or a heavy wool coverlet that had been in the family for generations. But here's a trick that I absolutely love. One of those clever solutions that makes you smile: the bed warmer. Before climbing into that cold bed, and it would be cold, because remember, the fire is dying down and you're about to get under covers that have been sitting in a cold room all day. Marguerite fills a copper bed warmer with hot coals from the fire. This bed warmer looks like a large covered pan on a long handle, with holes punched in the lid to let heat out without letting coals escape. She slides this bed warmer between the sheets, moving it back and forth, up and down the bed, warming the sheets and the mattress beneath. Can you imagine how good that would feel? Climbing into a bed that's been pre-warmed, where the sheets are toasty and welcoming instead of shockingly cold. It's the medieval version of an electric blanket, and in some ways, it's better because there's something psychologically comforting about knowing that warming was done with care, by hand, as an act of love by one family member for another. For those who didn't have copper bed warmers, and that was most people, there were alternatives. Stones heated by the fire and wrapped in cloth could be placed at the foot of the bed, radiating heat for hours. Bottles later, much later, but even by the late medieval period in some places could be filled with hot water and tucked under the covers. Some people even took a heated brick, wrapped it in flannel, and used that as a foot warmer. Let me tell you about layers, too, because layering is perhaps the most important concept in medieval warmth. Medieval people understood instinctively what modern outdoor enthusiasts have had to relearn, that multiple thin layers trap more heat than one thick layer, and that trapped air is the key to insulation. So in deep winter, a person getting dressed in the morning might put on, first, a linen shirt or shift against the skin. Linen wicks away sweat, which is important because wet skin gets cold fast. Then a wool tunic or dress wool is magically, it insulates even when wet and doesn't catch fire easily like linen can. Then perhaps another wool tunic or a sleeveless overtunic. Then a wool cloak for outdoors. And finally, for those heading out into real cold, a hooded cloak made of heavier wool, or even, for the wealthy, furlined on the legs. Linen bries, basically underwear, then wool hose tied up to the belt. Then sometimes wool leg wraps for extra warmth. On the feet, wool socks, inside, leather shoes or boots, and for outdoor work in snow. Sometimes additional wool wraps or cloth bindings around the feet and lower legs. And here's what's brilliant. All of these layers create air pockets. Air trapped between the linen and the inner wool tunic. Air trapped between the inner and outer tunic. Air trapped in the weave of the wool itself. Each layer of trapped air is a barrier against the cold. And when you move, when you go about your daily work, your body heat warms all these layers of air, creating a personal environment that moves with you. The Beaumont family, on this November evening, is demonstrating all of these principles without thinking about them. They're wearing their layers because, inside the house, you don't fully undress when it's cold. You might remove the outer cloak and the outdoor shoes, but you keep the tunics on, keep the hose on, keep those layers of warmth wrapped around you. Isabel is wearing a wool dress over a linen shift, with a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. When she gets cold and the area away from the fireplace can get chilly, she simply stands and moves closer to the fire for a few minutes, turning slowly like a rotisserie chicken, warming all sides before returning to her spot. This constant movement toward and away from the fire, this circulation around the heat source, it's like a dance. Everyone knows without being taught. Pierre has been working on something special in his spare time, a wooden screen that he's planning to place near the doorway. This screen, when positioned correctly, will block drafts from the door without blocking passage. It's going to be covered with old cloth or even leather if he can get some scraps from the tanner, creating a baffle that cold air has to go around instead of blowing straight into the living space. These little improvements, these small constructions and adjustments, this is how medieval households adapted. Not with one grand solution, but with dozens of small ones. A screen here, a curtain there, extra straw stuffed in a gap, a shelf positioned to deflect a draft. Each family, each household, developed their own suite of tricks and techniques, passed down through generations, with new innovations added as people observed what worked. As the evening grows later and the family prepares for bed, there's a ritual to banking the fire. This is crucial. Get it wrong, and you wake to a cold house and have to start the fire from scratch, which in winter, with cold hands and frozen tinder, is nobody's idea of a good time. Marguerite uses a poker to spread out the burning logs, creating a bed of coals. On top of these coals, she places one large log oak, because oak burns slowly and creates long-lasting coals. Then, using a shovel, she covers the whole thing with ash from the edges of the fireplace. This ash acts as insulation, keeping the coals hot but not actively burning. They'll smolder under there all night, burning the log incredibly slowly, creating just enough heat to keep the room from freezing, but not so much heat that the log is consumed. In the morning, Marguerite will rake away the ash, find red coals still glowing underneath, add some kindling, give a few gentle breaths of air, and the fire will spring back to life without any need for flint and steel. It's almost magical, this banking of the fire. It's like putting the flame to sleep, trusting it to rest and be ready to wake when needed. And there's something deeply satisfying about knowing that the fire, this essential, life-giving element, but persists through the night, waiting, ready, faithful, as the Beaumonts settle into their beds, drawing their curtains closed. The house grows quiet. The fire glows beneath its blanket of ash. The heat stored in the stone fireplace radiates gently outward. The thick walls, the low ceiling, the closed shutters, the drawn bed curtains, all of it working together to hold warmth, to ensure that morning comes with hope instead of hardship. And as we leave this warm stone cottage, as we drift toward our next destination in this long night's journey, let yourself feel what they feel, the comfort of being warm when the world is cold, the security of a well-prepared home, the peace of knowing that you've done everything possible to ensure your survival and comfort. Let that peace carry you deeper into rest, into sleep, into dreams as warm as a banked fire. Now, let me tell you about something wonderful. The kind of wonderful that you can taste and smell and feel, warming you from the inside out. Because staying warm in medieval winter wasn't just about fires and blankets and clever architecture. It was also about eating the right things, drinking the right drinks, consuming calories that would be turned into heat by the miraculous furnace of the human body. We're going to slip forward in time a bit, to January of 1423, right in the heart of winter. And we're going to visit a slightly different household, this time in a German village in what we'd now call Bavaria. The household belongs to Hans the baker. And yes, before you ask, the irony of a baker being especially prepared for winter warmth is not lost on anyone in the village. Hans has an advantage that most don't. His cottage is attached to his bakery, and the bakery has an oven. Not a little oven, but a massive brick structure that takes up a quarter of the building. A beast that, once heated, stays hot for days and radiates warmth like a small personal sun. When Hans bakes bread every 3 days, he bakes for much of the village. Not just his own family, the oven heats the bakery to almost uncomfortable levels. and that heat seeps through the adjoining wall into the living quarters, keeping the cottage warm for days afterward. But tonight, we're not here for the bread. We're here for the meal that Hans's wife Greta is preparing, because this meal tells a story about how medieval people understood the relationship between food and warmth in ways we've largely forgotten. Let's start with breakfast, or what passes for breakfast in January in medieval Bavaria. The family rises in darkness winter. Sunrise won't come until well after 7 in the morning, and work starts much earlier. The first thing Greta does, even before banking up the fire, is heat ale. Not cold milk, not water, but ale, slightly warmed in a pot over the revived fire. This warm ale is served with yesterday's bread, starting to go stale, which is torn into chunks and dropped into wooden bowls. Then the warm ale is poured over the bread, creating a kind of soup that's called alesops or brewis, depending on where you are. Sometimes, if there's fat, available bacon drippings, a bit of butter, even just the fat skimmed from yesterday's soup, that's making it richer, more caloric, and more warming. This breakfast is genius for winter. It's hot, which means it warms you immediately from the inside. It's full of calories from the bread and any fat that's added. The ale, besides being safer than water, contains residual sugars and some B vitamins from the brewing process. And it's easy on a stomach that's been empty all night. The bread is softened, easy to digest, ready to be turned into energy quickly. But let's move to the main meal of the day, which in winter might be eaten as early as mid-afternoon, when the light is already starting to fade. Greta has been preparing this meal in various ways for the past day and a half. It starts with a stock pot, a large iron pot that lives on a hook by the fire, and, like the fire itself, is never allowed to go completely empty or cold during winter. Into this pot, Greta has been putting scraps and bones and bits and pieces for days. Bones from the goose they ate last week, saved carefully and roasted again to extract every bit of marrow and flavor. Vegetable scrapstops of turnips, tough outer leaves of cabbage, onion skins, which add a beautiful golden color to the broth, ham hocks, salted and stored since autumn's slaughter, dried peas that were harvested in the summer and have been soaking overnight to soften, barley, which gives the soup body and thickness, dried herbs from the summer garden, sage, thyme, parsley tied in a bundle and suspended in the liquid. This is pottage, and it's what medieval peasants ate more than anything else. Not roasted meat, not fancy pies, but this thick, hearty soup that was more stew than soup, really. Thick enough that a wooden spoon would stand up in it if you let go. And friends, I need you to understand something. This was delicious. Not just acceptable or filling, but genuinely delicious in a way that would satisfy you even today if you tried it. The long cooking and, I mean long, like all day long. The pot sitting at the edge of the fire where it's hot enough to simmer but not boil hard. This long cooking breaks down everything. The collagen in the bones turns into gelatin, giving the broth a rich, almost velvety texture. The peas and barley break down into a thick cream that binds everything together. The salt from the ham hock seasons the whole pot. The herbs release their oils and flavors. By the time this pottage is ready to eat, it's a complete meal in a bowl: protein, carbohydrates, fat, vitamins, all in a form that's hot and filling and deeply, intensely satisfying. Now, here's where the warmth comes in. A bowl of hot pottage, and I mean genuinely hot, steaming. The kind of temperature where you have to blow on each spoonful before eating that bowl of soup does something remarkable to your body. First, the heat itself warms your mouth, your throat, and your stomach. You can literally feel the warmth spreading through your core. Then, as your body digests this food, as it breaks down the proteins and carbohydrates and fats, it generates even more heat through the process of digestion itself. This is called thermogenesis, and it's why a good hot meal can keep you warm for hours after eating, and the portions weren't small either. In winter, when people were burning calories just to stay warm, when physical labor in the cold demanded enormous amounts of energy, meals were substantial. Hans and Greta and their 3 children might eat 2 or even 3 bowls of this pottage, each sopping up every last bit with chunks of bread, making sure nothing was wasted, making sure every calorie was consumed with the pot. They're eating bread, but not plain bread. This is bread with actual substance, made from rye flour, mixed with some wheat if they can afford it, with a dense, chewy texture that's nothing like the fluffy white bread we're used to today. This bread is dark, almost black, with a slightly sour flavor from the natural fermentation of the dough. It's heavy, filling, packed with fiber and nutrients. One thick slice of this bread has the caloric power of 3 slices of modern white bread and butter, if they have it, or lard, if they don't. Fat spreads thick on the bread because fat is calories, and calories are warmth. And no one in medieval winter was worried about cholesterol or watching their weight. Thin was dangerous in winter. This meant you had no reserves, no insulation, no buffer between you and the cold. A bit of healthy plumpness, some good fat stored up from autumn's harvest that was insurance. That was survival. Let me tell you about a special treat that Greta sometimes makes on the very coldest nights. When the wind is howling outside and frost is thick on the inside of the shutters, she takes some of the pottage, maybe a bowl's worth, and she adds dried fruit to it. Apples, dried in the autumn sun and stored in sacks. Maybe some dried pears, if the year was good. A handful of raisins, if Hans has had a particularly good week at the bakery and could afford the luxury. She lets this cook down until the fruit is plump and soft, and the pottage has thickened even more, becoming almost solid. Then she adds honey presets, expensive honey that's usually saved for special occasions or for treating coughs and sore throats, and maybe some spices. Not much, because spices are worth their weight in silver. But perhaps a tiny pinch of cinnamon or a few crushed grains of paradise, a type of pepper-like spice popular in medieval cooking. What she ends up with is something that's half savory, half sweet, strange to our modern tastes, perhaps, but absolutely heavenly when you're cold and tired and need comfort. The children get the first portions of this, spooned into smaller bowls, and they eat it slowly, savoring every bite, because they know this isn't an everyday food. This is special. This is warmth and love and survival mixed together in a bowl. Now let's talk about drinks. Because what you drank in medieval winter was just as important as what you ate. We've already mentioned ale, which was universal leaven. Children drank weak ale because, again, Water could be dangerous, and the brewing process made ale safe. But in winter, there were special warm drinks that were reserved for the coldest days and nights. Mulled ale, or mulled wine, for those who could afford wine, was a revelation. Take your ale or wine, pour it into a pot, and heat it gently. Add honey for sweetness. Add spices, if you have them, cloves, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg. Heat it until it's steaming but not boiling, because boiling would cook off the alcohol, and nobody wanted that. Then serve it hot in wooden or ceramic cups that you wrap your cold hands around, absorbing heat through your palms while you sip. This hot, spiced ale was medicinal as much as pleasurable. The heat was soothing. The alcohol had a warming effect, though we now know that's partly an illusion. It made people feel warmer, even if it wasn't technically raising their core temperature. The spices, many of which came from tropical climates and had warming properties, according to medieval medical theory, were thought to balance the cold, wet nature of winter. And the honey provided quick energy, calories that could be rapidly converted to heat for those who couldn't afford spices. There was a simpler version, hot ale with butter melted into it. Yes, butter in your beer. It sounds strange, I know, but think about it: hot liquid, fat for calories and richness, a smooth, coating sensation that's comforting and filling. It was called buttered ale or ale posset, and it was especially given to people who were sick or to women recovering from childbirth, times when building up warmth and strength was crucial. And then there was pottage's liquid cousin, caudle. This was a warm, thin drink made from ale or wine, mixed with oatmeal or breadcrumbs to give it body, sweetened with honey or sugar if available, spiced with whatever was on hand, and sometimes enriched with egg yolks beaten into the warm liquid. Caudle was what you drank when you came in from hours of work in the freezing cold. When your fingers were numb and your face was raw from wind, you'd wrap both hands around a mug of caudle and drink it down slowly, feeling life return to your extremities, feeling your core temperature rise, feeling almost human again. The evening in Hans and Greta's household winds down with full bellies and warm bodies. The children, well-fed and drowsy, need little encouragement to head to bed. Hans and Greta sit for a few moments longer by the fire, perhaps sharing a final cup of warm ale, perhaps just sitting in comfortable silence, digesting their meal, feeling their food doing its work, creating heat and energy and life. There's a deep satisfaction in this, a contentment that goes beyond mere survival. Good food, eaten warm, shared with family, in a house that's been properly prepared for winter. This is not just surviving. This is living well within the constraints of the time and place. These people aren't suffering. They're not miserable. They're managing, coping, thriving even, using every trick and technique their ancestors learned and passed down. And as the fire dims, as the house cools just slightly, as the stored heat in the baked brick walls and the recently digested food maintain a comfortable warmth, the family sleeps. Their bodies are fueled, ready to generate heat through the night, ready to wake and face another cold day. Let yourself feel that fullness, that satisfaction as we move forward into the next chapter of our winter night. Feel the warmth spreading from your center, the comfort of a good meal, the security of knowing you're well-fed and well-prepared for whatever the cold might bring. Now I want to tell you something that's going to sound simple, almost too obvious to mention, but which was absolutely central to surviving medieval winters. People stayed close to each other. Not just close, like in the same house, but close like sharing body heat, close like sleeping in piles, close like treating human warmth as the precious resource it was. Let's visit a different kind of household now. It's February of 1356, and we're in a village in northern Scotland, where winter isn't just cold, it's brutal. The wind comes off the North Sea with nothing to stop it. Temperatures regularly drop below 0 Fahrenheit, and snow can pile up high enough to bury the lower windows of cottages. This is a place where winter is a serious adversary, and the people who live here have developed strategies that border on genius. The household we're visiting is larger than the previous ones. It's what's called an extended family household. There's the main couple, Malcolm, and his wife Fiona, both in their 40s. There's Malcolm's elderly mother, Moira, who's probably in her 60s, which is quite old for the medieval period. There are Malcolm and Fiona's 4 children, ranging from age 18 down to 6. And there's also Malcolm's younger brother, unmarried, who lives with the family and contributes to the household. That's 9 people total, living in a cottage that's really just one large room with a small attached space for animals and storage. And you might think that sounds crowded, uncomfortable, a recipe for conflict and irritation. But in winter, in Scotland, those 9 people are a heating system. Let me explain. A human body, just by existing, generates heat roughly 100 watts of heat per person, about the same as a standard incandescent light bulb used to produce. 9 people together, just sitting still, generate 900 watts of heat, roughly equivalent to a small space heater. When those 9 people are all in one room with a fire going, that room gets warm and stays warm with remarkably little fuel consumption. But the magic really happens at night. The family has constructed sleeping arrangements that maximize shared warmth. There are 3 sleeping platforms built into the walls of the cottage, each one essentially a large box with one side open to the room. These box beds, as they're called, are draped with heavy wool curtains that can be closed at night, creating a small enclosed sleeping space in one box bed. Malcolm and Fiona sleep with their 2 youngest children. In another, the 3 older children sleep together. In the third, Malcolm's mother sleeps with Malcolm's younger brother, and before you raise eyebrows, understand that this was common and completely normal. Gender-separated sleeping was for the wealthy who had room for it. Peasant families did what worked. Each of these box beds becomes a micro-environment. When the curtains are drawn and 2 or 3 or 4 people are inside, their combined body heat warms the enclosed space quickly and efficiently. The curtains trap this heat, prevent drafts, create a cozy nest that stays warm even as the main room cools during the night. The mattresses themselves are designed for warmth. The base is heatherias, the purple flowering heather that grows wild on Scottish hillsides. Dried heather, with its springy stems and airy structure, makes an excellent mattress. It's naturally antibacterial. It's resilient, so it doesn't compress into a hard lump. And most importantly, it traps air in its structure, creating insulation between the sleepers and the wooden platform below. On top of the heather goes a layer of wool blankets or sheepskins, creating a soft surface to lie on. Then the sleepers themselves, wearing wool shifts or sleeping in their day clothes in the coldest weather. You didn't undress for bed, you just removed your outer layers and climbed in wearing everything else. Then more wool blankets on top, then a final covering of furs if the family has them, or another heavy wool coverlet if they don't. But here's the real key. The people inside share warmth. Children sleep between adults, absorbing heat from both sides. Elderly Moira, whose own heat production is less than it once was, sleeps next to Malcolm's brother, whose younger body generates heat readily. When someone gets cold during the night, they simply move closer to another person, seeking warmth instinctively. Even in sleep. There's no privacy in this arrangement, of course. There's no personal space in the way we understand it, but there's also no loneliness, no isolation, no one left cold and alone in the dark. Everyone is connected, physically and literally, in the simple and profound act of keeping each other warm during the day. This principle of shared warmth continues in different ways. Work that can be done indoors is done communally, with everyone gathered in the same area of the cottage. Fiona and Moira might both be spinning wool, sitting close together by the fire, their work allowing for conversation, for companionship, for the simple presence of another person. The children might be carding wool, or mending clothes, or working on some other task that can be done while sitting still, and they do it together in a cluster, sharing heat without thinking about it. When someone has to go outside to fetch water from the well, to bring in peat from the stack, to check on the animals, they dress heavily and they go quickly, minimizing time in the cold. But here's something interesting. Often they go in pairs, not just for safety or companionship, though those matter, but because two people working together stay warmer than one person working alone. You move more, generate more heat, have someone to notice if you're getting dangerously cold. Let me tell you about a practice that was common in the coldest parts of Northern Europe, something called night visiting, or keeping company, in the depths of winter. When nights were longest and coldest, young people from the village would gather in one cottage for the evening. Not for any improper purposes. These gatherings were supervised by adults and were completely respectable, but simply to be together, to share warmth, to pass the long, dark hours with conversation, songs, stories, and simple human presence. 20 or 30 young people in one cottage. All that body heat, all that life and energy, the room would be positively warm, even with the fire banked low to conserve fuel. They'd work while they gathered, the girls spinning or knitting, the boys carving or repairing tools, but mostly they'd talk and laugh and be young together, creating memories and bonds that would last their whole lives. And there was something else these gatherings did, something psychological and emotional that was just as important as the physical warmth. They fought off the isolation and depression that long winters could bring. When darkness comes at 4 in the afternoon and doesn't leave until 8 in the morning, when you're trapped inside by weather that can kill you, the presence of other people, other voices, other faces, other lives intersecting with yours is medicine. It's a treatment for a soul sickness that comes from too much cold, too much dark, too much alone back in Malcolm's household. As evening comes on this February night, the family gathers for their main meal. The pottage tonight is Rabbit Malcolm managed to trap 2 rabbits yesterday, a lucky catch that means meat for the family. The rabbit has been simmering all day with turnips and onions and barley, creating a rich, gamey stew that's thickened with oatmeal stirred in at the last moment. They eat from a communal pot, each person with their own wooden spoon and bowl, but the pot is passed around, everyone serving themselves, everyone dipping their bread into the center. This communal eating, this sharing from one pot, is another way warmth is shared, not just physical warmth of the hot food, but the warmth of family, of belonging, of being part of something larger than yourself. After eating, there's music. Malcolm's brother has a small wooden flute that he carved himself, and he plays simple tunes, folk songs, dance tunes, melodies that everyone knows. Fiona sings, her voice strong and clear, and the children join in on the choruses. Moira tells a story, an old tale about Selkie's seal people from Celtic folklore, her voice rising and falling with the drama of the narrative. The children gathered around her, hanging on every word. This isn't just entertainment, though it is that. This is active warmth generation. Singing raises your heart rate, makes you breathe deeper, and generates body heat. Telling stories with animation, with gesture and expression, does the same. The children listening with intense focus, their imaginations fully engaged, their emotions responding to the story. They're warm, not just from the fire and the food, but from the life inside them, the engaged, active life of minds and hearts, fully present in the moment. As bedtime approaches, there's a carefully choreographed routine. First, the youngest children are sent to relieve themselves outside, even in February in Scotland, because chamber pots inside a small cottage create smells that nobody wants to live with. They go quickly, bundled in every available layer, and they're back inside within minutes, faces red from cold, bodies shivering, but warmed quickly by the fire, and by being rubbed briskly with wool cloths by their mother. Then everyone takes a turn at the fire, warming thoroughly, getting as much heat into their bodies as they can before bed. This is important. Going to bed already warm means you bring heat into the bed with you, rather than relying entirely on the bed to warm you. While the family is warming, Fiona prepares the beds. She's been warming stones in the fire-smooth river stones, about the size of a fist, and now she wraps each one in cloth and places them in the beds, one at the foot of each sleeping platform. These stones will radiate heat for hours, keeping feet warm, which is crucial because cold feet can keep you awake and uncomfortable all night. Finally, everyone retires. The curtains are drawn on all 3 box beds. The fire is banked carefully, with enough fuel to keep coals alive until morning, but not so much that it's wasteful. The cottage grows dark and quiet, with only the soft glow of the banked fire and the sound of wind outside, howling around the corners of the cottage, finding every tiny gap, probing every weakness, looking for a way in. But inside, 9 people are warm, not because they've conquered the cold, not because they've defeated winter, but because they're together, because they understand instinctively that humans are social creatures, pack animals, beings who've survived for millennia, not through individual strength, but through cooperation, through community, through the simple and profound act of staying close to each other when the world turns hostile. In the box bed, where the youngest children sleep with their parents, little Angus, age 6, nestles between his mother and father, completely enclosed in warmth, completely safe, drifting into sleep with the sound of his parents' breathing surrounding him like a lullaby. This is what warmth really is, not just temperature, but love, safety, the presence of those who care about you and will keep you safe through the night. And as we leave this Scottish cottage, let these thoughts settle over you like a warm blanket, comforting and supportive. As we drift toward our final chapter of this long winter night, let me bring you now to the sweetest part of the story, not because winter is over, but because spring is beginning to feel possible, beginning to send its first subtle messages, beginning to offer hope that the cold will not last forever. It's late March of 1445, and we're back in England, in a village not far from where we began this journey. The family we're visiting has made it through winter, not easily, not without hardship, but they've made it. They've used every strategy we've talked about, every trick and technique developed over centuries. They've kept their fire alive, their bodies fed, their spirits from breaking. And now, finally, they're beginning to see signs that their endurance is paying off. Let me tell you what these first signs of spring look like, because they're subtle, so subtle that you'd miss them if you weren't looking, if you weren't desperately hoping for them. First, there's the light. Around the spring equinox, March 20th or 21st, daylight and darkness are equal. And then, day by day, light begins to win. The sun rises a little earlier each morning, sets a little later each evening. In a medieval village, where every hour of daylight means warmth and the ability to work and simply see, this lengthening of days is profound. People notice. They comment on it. The days are drawing out, they say. And there's hope in their voices, relief, a sense that they're turning a corner. William the Thatcher, the head of the household we're visiting, wakes one morning in late March and realizes something wonderful. It's dawn, not the middle of the night, not that pre-dawn darkness that had characterized his waking hours all winter, but actual dawn, with light filtering through the gaps in the shutters. He lies still for a moment, just appreciating this, feeling something in his chest that he hadn't fully realized was clenched all winter, finally beginning to relax. The second sign is temperature. It's still cold. It's March in England. After all, but the cold has a different quality to it now. It's not the bone-deep, never-ending cold of January. It's cold with moments of warmth, with sunny afternoons when you can actually feel the sun's heat on your face, with middays when the temperature might climb above freezing and stay there for a few hours. William notices that the bucket of water by the door, which had been frozen solid every morning for months, is now only skimmed with ice, and by mid-morning that ice has melted. It's a small thing, but it means the world. It means that the balance is shifting, that warmth is beginning to win its daily battle against cold. The third sign is water. Snow that has been on the ground since December is finally melting. Not all at once. Medieval England didn't have the dramatic spring thaw of, say, Russia, but gradually, persistently. William hears it before he sees it. The sound of dripping, of water running, of ice letting go. It's the most beautiful sound, the song of winter's retreat. The ditches are running with meltwater. The stream that was frozen over for months is flowing again, ice breaking up and floating downstream in chunks. There's mud everywhere, thick, sucking, frustrating mud that makes every journey outside an ordeal, but that mud means the ground is thawing, which means that soon, very soon, they'll be able to work the soil again. The fourth sign, And this one makes William's wife, Elizabeth, actually cry with relief and joy. Is green. Not much green, not the lush green of full spring, but the first tentative green of plants that have survived winter and are beginning to grow again. In the garden plot behind the cottage, protected by a wattle fence and the cottage wall, Elizabeth finds the first shoots of onions pushing up through the soil. They're tiny, pale green, barely there, but they're alive, they're growing. They're food that will be ready soon. And in the hedgerows, if you look carefully, you can see buds swelling on the hawthorn and blackthorn. These buds have been there all winter, hard and tight, sealed against the cold. But now they're changing, softening, getting ready to burst open. In a week or two, there will be the first flowers, hawthorn blossoms, celandines, violet sand. Then you'll really know that spring has won. The fifth sign is birds. Not that all birds disappeared in winter. Some stayed, hardy species that could survive the cold and find enough food. But now the migrants are returning, birds that fled south in autumn and are coming back to breed and raise their young. William wakes one morning to birdsong, real birdsong, not the sparse chirping of winter, but a full chorus. Thrushes, blackbirds, wrens, all singing their territorial songs, claiming nesting sites, courting mates, living loudly and joyfully in a way that had been absent for months. Elizabeth hears the birds and smiles. She's been rationing their food supplies carefully, making the stored grain and preserved meat stretch, and they're getting low, close to the edge. But hearing those birds, knowing that soon there will be eggs, wild bird eggs, that can be collected from nests, and then their own chickens will start laying more frequently as daylight increases. Knowing that edible plants will soon be sprouting eases her worry. The sixth sign is human behavior. All through winter, people stayed inside as much as possible, ventured out only when necessary, kept interactions brief because standing still outside meant getting dangerously cold. But now, as temperatures moderate and daylight extends, people are outside more. Neighbors who haven't really talked since autumn are catching up, sharing news, comparing notes on how their families survived the winter, who was sick, who recovered, who didn't make it. There's a communal energy that's been dormant waking up again. William and Elizabeth's children are playing outside, really playing, not just rushing through necessary chores. They're running, shouting, expending energy in that way children do when they've been cooped up too long and are finally free. The sound of children playing, it's another song of spring, another sign that life is returning to normal. The seventh sign is food, not just the promise of new food growing, but the food that's traditionally available in early spring. This is the season for spring tonic, for the first fresh greens after months of stored food. Elizabeth sends the children to gather nettles wearing gloves, because nettles sting, and these nettles, boiled and eaten like spinach, provide vitamins and minerals that the family has been craving without quite knowing it. There's also chickweed, dandelion greens, wild garlic, all growing now, all edible, all free for the taking. And there are the special treats. If you know where to look, you can find wild leeks, ramps, which have a mild onion garlic flavor that's incredible after months of bland preserved food. There are the first wild mushrooms of the year. There are fiddlehead ferns just uncurling from the ground. Nature is providing, offering abundance again after the scarcity of winter. William has been working on preparing for spring planting. The ground is still too wet and cold to plow, but he's been checking his tools, repairing the plow blade, treating the leather harness for the ox. They don't own an ox, but they share one with 3 other families in the village. He's sorting seeds, planning what will be planted where, thinking about the growing season ahead. There's optimism in this planning, but also anxiety. Every farmer knows that late spring can still bring disaster. Late frost can kill tender plants. Too much rain can rot seeds in the ground. Too little rain can prevent germination. But that's a problem for later. Right now, in late March, it's enough to have survived winter to see signs of spring, to know that the cycle continues. The cottage itself is getting a spring cleaning, though that won't be complete until the weather is reliably warm. Elizabeth has taken advantage of a rare, sunny, relatively warm day to take out all the bedding, the sheepskins, the wool blankets, everything, and hang them outside to air. Months of being in a closed, smoky cottage have left everything smelling of wood smoke and human occupation. A few hours in fresh air and sunlight makes an incredible difference. She's also removed the old rushes from the floor, sweeping them out the door where they'll eventually be composted or used as animal bedding. The floor is swept clean, and new rushes will be put down soon, fresh and sweet-smelling, creating a renewed sense of cleanliness and freshness in the cottage. On one particularly lovely afternoon, when the sun is warm and there's almost no wind, William and Elizabeth take a walk together, something they haven't done in months. They walk to the edge of the village, to a spot where you can look out over the fields, and they stand there, just looking, just appreciating. The fields are brown and muddy, not particularly beautiful by summer standards, but to their eyes, those fields are full of promise. Soon those fields will be plowed and planted. Then they'll be green with growing crops, then golden with ripe grain, then harvested, providing food for another year, allowing them to prepare for another winter. It's a cycle they've lived through many times: winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter again. But each time they come through winter and see spring returning, it feels like a gift, like a promise kept, like proof that persistence pays off, that survival is possible, that life continues. Elizabeth reaches for William's hand, and they stand there together, not speaking, just being present in this moment of transition, this pause between winter's end and spring's true beginning. Their tired winter takes a toll, there's no denying it. They're thinner than they were in autumn, their stores of body fat depleted. They're worn from months of cold, from the constant effort of staying warm, from the psychological weight of darkness and confinement. But they're here. They've made it. And spring is coming, is here in small ways already, is promising warmth and light and abundance and ease. They've done what humans have done for millennia. They've survived winter, not with modern technology, not with heated homes and supermarkets and all the conveniences we take for granted, but with ingenuity, with community, with knowledge passed down through generations, with persistence and hope and the simple determination to see another spring. As evening comes and they walk back to the cottage, William thinks about all the winters he's survived, all the springs he's seen. He's 40 years old, which means he's seen 40 springs, survived 40 winters. His parents, his grandparents, his ancestors stretching back into the mist of time of them did the same. They learned, they adapted, they found ways to live through the coldest nights, and then they taught their children, who taught their children, creating an unbroken chain of survival and wisdom that connects the past to the present that night. As the family settles around the fire for their evening meal, there's a lightness that hasn't been present for months. The fire is smaller than its bin fuel is running low, but that's okay because soon they won't need such large fires. The meal is simpler than its bin supplies are depleted, but that's okay because soon there will be fresh food, new growth, and abundance returning. The youngest child, a daughter named Agnes, who's only 4, says something that makes everyone smile. The cold is going away, she says, with absolute confidence, as if she's announcing a great discovery. We made it go away. And in a way, she's right. They didn't actually make winter go away. That's the Earth's tilt and orbit, the mechanics of the solar system that no human can control. But they did survive it. They did endure it. They did make it through with their lives and their humanity intact. And that's its own kind of victory, its own kind of magic. As the fire burns down and the family prepares for sleep, William stands at the door for a moment, looking out at the night. It's still cold, still dark, earlier than he'd like. But there's a difference, a softness to the darkness, a sense that it's no longer threatening, but simply temporary, simply the night that will give way to tomorrow's light. He closes the door and turns back to his family, to the warm cottage that has sheltered them through the cold months, to the life they've built and maintained despite the challenges. And he feels something he hasn't felt in months: contentment. Not happiness exactly. Life is still hard. There are still problems to solve and challenges to face. But contentment, the deep satisfaction of having done what needed to be done, of having protected what matters most, of having survived. And tonight, friends, as we come to the end of our journey through medieval winter, as we've explored all the ways that ordinary people survived extraordinary colds, I hope you're feeling some of that same contentment. Not because your challenges are the same, they're not. We live in a different world with different struggles. But because the fundamental human qualities that medieval peasants got through winter are still there in you: resilience, ingenuity, the ability to adapt, the capacity to find warmth both literal and metaphorically then in the coldest times. May these stories carry you into peaceful dreams, dreams where you're warm and safe and surrounded by everything you need to survive whatever winter you're facing. And if you drifted off somewhere along this journey, if my voice became the companion that helped you find sleep, then I'm honored to have shared this time with you. Sweet dreams, friends. May you wake to your own version of spring, to warmth and light and the promise of new growth. And until we meet again in another quiet corner of history, rest well, stay warm, and remember, we're all just doing what humans have always done, finding our way through the cold toward the light. The fire fades to embers, the night deepens, and sleep, warm and gentle, finally comes. Gentle outro, and there we rest, friends, at the end of our long winter night. We've walked through medieval cottages, felt the warmth of banked fires, tasted the thick comfort of pottage, shared the body heat of families sleeping close, learned the psychological strength required to endure months of cold and dark, and finally witnessed the first tender signs of spring. These medieval peasants, these ordinary people living extraordinary lives, have so much to teach us. They survive not through individual strength alone, but through community, through accumulated wisdom, through the simple courage of getting up each morning and doing what needed to be done. They found warmth in fires and food and each other. They found hope in small signs of progress. They found meaning in work and routine and ritual. They endured, and so can you. Whatever winter you're facing, whether it's the literal cold of the season or the metaphorical winter of a difficult time in your life, remember that you come from a long line of survivors, that humans have faced challenges far greater than any of us will likely encounter, and that we have within us the same resilience, the same capacity to adapt, the same ability to find light even in darkness. If this journey helped you unwind tonight, if these stories gave you comfort or peace or simply a warm place to rest your mind for a while, I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. Share what resonated with you. Tell me about your own experiences with cold or winter or simply surviving hard times. Your stories matter. Your experiences connect us all. And if you'd like more of these gentle journeys through history, more nights of peaceful exploration, more warm conversations in the quiet hours, subscribe to this channel. There's so much more to discover together, so many more corners of the past that can teach us, comfort us, help us sleep. But for now, for tonight, just rest. Let go of whatever you've been carrying. Feel the warmth of the metaphorical fire we've shared. Know that morning will come, that spring always follows winter, that you have within you everything you need to make it through to dawn. Sweet dreams, dear friends. Sleep well, stay warm, and thank you for letting me share this time with you. Whispers softly. Until next time, rest well, drift deep, and dream of warmth.